Okay, so right off the bat, this text throws out this really interesting idea about two paths to truth.
Two paths.
Yeah, one's described as masculine, all about aggression, like conquering knowledge.
Ah, I see.
And the other one is feminine, focused on surrender, letting the truth reveal itself to you.
Makes you wonder why they felt the need to gender those approaches.
Right. It's interesting how the text uses some pretty strong imagery to make its point. Well, it compares this aggressive pursuit of knowledge to violence against nature.
Violence.
Yeah, it even goes as far as using the word rape in relation to the divine.
Wow, that's intense. You don't see that every day in philosophical
Well,
texts.
it definitely makes you stop and think.
It does make you wonder about the message there. Is it saying we shouldn't even try to learn?
Well, I don't think it's saying knowledge is bad. It's more about how we approach it. Like, the text seems to be suggesting that if we try to force our way to understanding, we only scratch the surface.
Yeah, if you bulldoze your way through something delicate, you're going to miss the nuances.
Exactly. So instead of attacking knowledge head on, maybe we need to be a little more gentle.
Precisely. More receptive, letting the truth unfold in its own time. Which, by the way, brings us to the text's critique of science.
Ooh, here comes the controversial part.
Well, maybe not controversial, but definitely food for thought. The text basically suggests that the scientific method, with all that dissecting and analyzing, sometimes misses the bigger picture.
So by focusing on the tiny details, we lose sight of the whole.
Yeah, like that classic example, a scientist dissecting a flower to understand its beauty.
Right, they can break it down to its chemical components, but
But have they really grasped the essence of what makes that flower beautiful? That feeling you get just from looking at it.
I see what they're getting at. It's like you can take apart a clock to see how it works, but you'll never experience the wonder of time just passing by.
Exactly. So if science isn't the ideal path, what's the alternative? The text proposes this idea of prayer and patience.
Prayer and patience. Sounds almost like a spiritual practice.
It is. It's about savoring knowledge, like you would a poem, absorbing its meaning slowly, letting it wash over you instead of trying to grasp it all at once.
Knowledge as poetry, that's beautiful. It's definitely a different way of thinking about learning.
And it leads us to another radical concept in this text, the idea that the only true possession we have is ourselves.
Ourselves, what does that even mean, like practically speaking?
The text uses this term, Chaitanya Atma.
Chaitanya Atma.
It essentially means the self. And it's saying that everything we think we own, possessions, relationships, our social status, it's all an illusion. The only thing that truly belongs to us is our own consciousness, our being.
So all that stuff about family, money, achievement, it's all just smoke and mirrors.
Well, that's what the text seems to argue. It suggests that all these societal structures, all these hierarchies are built on this illusion of ownership, this idea that we can actually possess things or even people.
I bet some listeners are going to have a hard time swallowing that one. Family, relationships, those feel pretty real to most people.
Right. But that's what makes this text so fascinating. It challenges us to question our assumptions about reality, what truly matters, what are we holding on to so tightly?
So it's not saying that relationships are meaningless.
No, not at all. It's more about understanding their nature. They're fluid, ever-changing, not something we can control or own.
So if we let go of this idea that we own things, that we own people, where does that leave us?
According to this text, it leaves us with the most important thing, ourselves, our own consciousness. And that's where true compassion and altruism can arise.
Wait, so you're saying to be truly giving, we first need to understand ourselves.
That's the idea. The text argues that as long as we're caught up in this illusion of ownership, our actions are often driven by ego, by a need to control or possess.
But when we see the self as the only true possession,
Our actions become more authentic, more compassionate, because they're not coming from a place of lack.
I think I'm starting to see the connection. But this idea that everything external is an illusion, it's a tough one to grasp. Does the text offer any more insight into this?
It does. There's this story about a king and his 3 sons. Each son is trying to prove their altruism to the king.
I love a good story.
So the first son, he's like, Dad, I returned this huge fortune entrusted to me, even though I could have easily kept it.
It sounds pretty selfless.
Right. Then the second son chimes in. He's all, I risked my own life to save a drowning man.
Wow, that's even more impressive.
And finally, the third son steps up. He tells how he saved the life of his sworn enemy, knowing this guy would probably keep bad-mouthing him anyway.
Now that's true selflessness.
You'd think so, right? But get this, the king rejects each son's claim.
What?
He says they were all driven by self-interest. The first son, fear of guilt. The second, fear of being haunted by the memory. The third, a desire for moral superiority.
Oh, wow. I never would have thought of it that way. It's like these hidden motives we're not even aware of.
Exactly. And that's the king's point. Even seemingly selfless acts can be subtly influenced by the ego. Our self-image, our desires, they're all tangled up in there.
Makes you wonder about your own motivations, huh?
Right. And it brings us back to this idea of the self as the only true possession. Because if we're always seeking validation, recognition, are we still stuck in that illusion of ownership, trying to control how others see us?
So how do we break free from that? If we're so conditioned to need external validation, how do we cultivate genuine altruism?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. The text introduces this concept called Gyanam Band, knowledge as bondage.
Wait, knowledge is bondage. You mean learning things can actually hold us back?
That's exactly what this text is suggesting.
No, I'm really intrigued. We're going to have to dive into that after the break. But before we go, I have to ask, what do you think, listeners? Are you starting to question your own motivations? Let us know in the comments, and we'll be back with part 2. All right, welcome back. I don't know about you, but my brain's still buzzing from that last segment. We left off on this idea of Gyanam Band.
Knowledge as bondage.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild concept. Like, knowledge is supposed to be a good thing, right?
It is. But think about it. How often do we get so attached to what we know, to our beliefs, that we close ourselves off to anything new?
That's true. We build these walls around ourselves.
Walls of knowledge. And they can become prisons if we're not careful.
It's like, you know that saying, a mind is like a parachute. It only works when it's open.
Exactly. And that's what this text is getting at. It's not saying knowledge is bad, but we need to be aware of how we hold on to it.
So it's not about becoming ignorant. It's more about being open-minded, right? Like being willing to let go of ideas when they don't serve us anymore, or when we learn something new that challenges our thinking.
Precisely. Just think about all the conflict in the world, all the arguments. It often comes down to people clinging to their beliefs, refusing to budge.
Yeah, like religious differences, political debates, even arguments with family members sometimes.
Right. It's this fear of being wrong, of admitting we don't know everything. It shuts down any possibility of growth.
And this text is offering a different way. This idea of approaching knowledge with humility, with curiosity, with openness.
It's about seeing learning as a lifelong journey, not a destination you reach and then you're done.
That makes a lot of sense. So how does this all tie back to that idea of the self being the only true possession?
Well, when we over-identify with our knowledge, with our beliefs, it creates this separation between us and everyone else.
Like we define ourselves by what we know and what others don't.
Exactly. And that's the first layer of this Gyanam Band, this bondage. It's this clinging to the I, to the ego. It separates us from our true nature.
So first layer, clinging to ego. What about the second level? You said there were 2.
The second level is the accumulation of external knowledge itself.
So just having a lot of knowledge can be a problem.
It can create barriers between people, lead to arrogance, a sense of superiority, and ultimately to suffering.
Because if you're always comparing yourself to others based on what you know or don't know,
You'll never be content.
it's a never-ending cycle. Always striving, always wanting more.
Exactly. So if knowledge can lead to suffering, what's the alternative? Well, the text introduces this concept of vasana.
Vasana, what's that?
It means desire or craving. And the text argues that vasana is the root cause of this whole cycle of rebirth, this loop of suffering we're stuck in.
Rebirth. Are we talking about reincarnation now?
Yep, we're going deep into metaphysics here. The text explains that vasana is what drives the formation of the body, the perpetuation of suffering.
Wait, so our desires are what keep us tied to this cycle of birth and death.
That's the idea. Every action, thought, even desire leaves this karmic imprint. It shapes our future experiences.
So if we want to break free, we need to, like, transcend our desires.
You got it. And that's where Udyamo comes in.
Ujjayi, okay. Another new term. What's that one mean?
Spiritual effort. It's a conscious effort we make to move towards liberation.
So it's not just passively letting go of desires, it's actively working towards something more.
Exactly. The text uses the term Bhairava to represent this ultimate reality, this cosmic consciousness. So Ujjayi Bhairava is about aligning yourself with that reality through dedicated effort.
Okay, so we're putting in the work to break free from all this desire and suffering. But how? What does this spiritual effort look like in real life?
Well, the text connects it to the scientific observation that humans only use a fraction of their potential.
Yeah, that's crazy. when you think about it.
Right, and the text suggests that this untapped potential is connected to the Shakti chakra, this cycle of energy, and it can be completed through total effort, leading to a state of world dissolution.
Hold on. World dissolution, like the world ending. Things are getting a bit apocalyptic now.
Not exactly. It's talking about the dissolution of the perceived world, the world as seen through the lens of the ego. When we operate from a place of wholeness, that illusion of separation dissolves.
So not the literal end of the world, just our limited view of it.
Exactly. And the text says this state can be achieved through total immersion in any action. Art, craft, spiritual practice, it doesn't matter.
So it's not just about meditating on a mountaintop. It's about bringing that intensity, that presence to everything we do.
That seems to be the message. And this is where it gets really fascinating, because the text suggests that this complete immersion, this total effort, can lead to a dissolution of the self, an experience of unity with the cosmos.
Wow, that's pretty profound. But I have to admit, it's also a bit overwhelming. How do we even begin to approach that kind of transformation in our everyday lives?
Well, that's a great question. And maybe that's a good place to start for our next segment. We can delve into how these ideas about the self, knowledge, and liberation can actually be applied to the complexities of modern life.
All right, sounds like we're about to go even deeper. Stay tuned, listeners. We'll be right back to wrap up our deep dive into OSHVST01 Shiv Sutra 01. Amos Shiv. Welcome back, listeners. Are you ready to try and apply some of these mind-bending ideas to real life?
Well, it's one thing to talk about world dissolution and the limits of knowledge, but how do we actually live that?
Right. It's like, okay, great concepts, but what do I do with them on a Monday morning?
Exactly. And I don't think there's one simple answer. Everyone's journey is different.
But maybe we can start by revisiting those core principles from the text.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay, so we've got Chaitanya Atma, the self, as the only true possession. Gyanam Band, the idea that knowledge can trap us. And Ujjamo, the effort we need to break free.
Right. And it's important to remember the text isn't saying we should just be ignorant or isolate ourselves.
Yeah, it's more about a shift in perspective.
Exactly. Recognizing that true happiness doesn't come from clinging to external things or this illusion of ownership.
Okay, but how do we actually stop clinging? Our whole society is built on wanting more. More stuff, more status, more knowledge.
It starts with awareness. Can we notice when we're grasping, when we're defining ourselves by what we have or what we know?
You mean like catch yourself comparing yourself to others?
Yeah.
Or feeling jealous?
Exactly. Maybe instead of striving for more, we can try to appreciate what we already have.
That's easier said than done, though.
It is. But what if we focused on finding joy in the simple things? A good conversation, a beautiful sunset, a genuine connection with someone.
I think that's something a lot of us forget to do. We're so busy looking ahead, planning the next thing, that we miss the beauty of the present moment.
And when we do that, when we shift our focus inward, maybe that feeling of not having enough starts to fade away.
Dissolving that sense of lack. I love that. It goes back to the idea of the self being enough.
Right. If we can connect with that inner sense of wholeness, maybe we don't need constant validation from outside ourselves.
And maybe from that place, our actions become more genuine, more truly compassionate.
Exactly. Not giving out of obligation or to make ourselves look good, but because it comes from the heart.
So it's not about renouncing everything and living as a hermit. It's about changing our relationship to things.
Right. It's realizing that true fulfillment comes from within, not from what we accumulate or achieve.
Okay, but what about relationships? This text had some pretty strong opinions on those, saying even the deepest bonds are ultimately illusions.
Well, remember, it's not saying love itself is an illusion. It's more about the idea of possessing another person.
So letting go of the need to control or define someone.
Exactly. It's about appreciating them for who they are, their strengths, their flaws, their whole journey, even if it takes them on a different path than ours.
It's more like love is giving someone the freedom to fly, not holding them down.
I like that. And when we approach relationships from that place, there's room for real intimacy, for deep connection.
That makes sense. But what about work? We're always told success is about climbing the ladder, getting that promotion, that recognition. How do these principles apply in that world?
Maybe it starts with being honest about why we're doing what we're doing. Is it true passion, or are we chasing external validation? Money, status?
That's a tough question to answer sometimes.
It is. But maybe we can start by asking ourselves, what kind of work would bring me joy? Work that lets us use our skills to contribute something meaningful to the world, even if it doesn't come with a fancy title or a huge salary.
I think a lot of people are asking those kinds of questions these days. There's this feeling that there's got to be more to life than just climbing the corporate ladder.
Yeah, people are searching for meaning, for a sense of purpose, a way to connect their work to something bigger than themselves.
It feels like we're starting to question those old ideas of what it means to be successful.
And that's a good thing, isn't it? It shows we're evolving.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, it seems like the big takeaway is this. True happiness, true liberation, comes from within. It's about connecting with that inner self, letting go of attachments, and being open to new experiences.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination.
There will be ups and downs, for sure.
But if we keep practicing, keep putting in that effort, those layers of conditioning, those limiting beliefs, they start to fall away.
And who knows what we might find underneath.
Maybe we'll discover that the world is more interconnected, more magical than we ever imagined.
And on that note, we'll leave you with one last question to ponder. If the self is all we truly possess, and knowledge is just a tool on the path, what will you create with the freedom that awaits? Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Please like, share and subscribe.